I'm handing it over to Junia. We're
Yes.
so glad to have Thomas here, and I'm gonna let you do the introduction.
Already? All right. You want to start with a prayer?
Yes, I would love to start with a prayer. Would you be with me in a spirit of prayer? Holy God, we are so joyful to come together again this morning. People who love your world, love your people, and want to learn from you and from them. Thank you for bringing us a speaker this morning on the religion of Baha'i. We're looking forward to learning and getting the insight and wisdom that will touch us this morning. And thank you for all of the actions that your people are doing in the world to try to preserve each other's livelihoods. We ask for your inspiration this morning. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Morning. John and Carol and I don't see anybody else, are active in the New Term Multi-Faith Alliance. And Thomas Murphy is one of the Baha'i representatives. And we thought it would be really wonderful to have a chance to hear what Baha'i was all about.
Mm-hmm.
So I've invited Thomas to be here today, and he will talk about the Baha'i faith, and we'll have a chance to have questions and answers. But I'm supposed to introduce Thomas, and he sent me a very long summary of him, and I'm going to just shorten it. I told him that already. It's all right. But he is a Baha'i. He lives in Glenview, and will tell us about how the Baha'is worship. He's a writer and editor with 45 years of professional experience on publications ranging from scientific journals, which of course thrilled me, for the American Institute of Physics, to business training materials, on workshops and self-study programs for diverse Fortune 100 companies, including Amoco, Household Finance, Kraft, and Sears, to religious educational books. And I'm going to have you tell them how you became a Baha'i.
Oh, okay.
I think that would be,
Okay. I'd love to.
good. All right. But he grew up in New York City, lives in Glenview now, is married, and has 2 children and several grandchildren, right?
Almost right. One child who is light of our life, Sonia, the daughter, who's okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to stand because it helps.
Great.
Yeah, keeps the blood circulating, particularly at this hour for me. But I did have my morning coffee, so I'm feeling pretty stimulated and very stimulated to be with you all this morning. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love the concept of this group, spiritual enrichment. I think that's a wonderful goal. It's certainly a goal I'm still pursuing. I'm not sure Junia said this, but I've been a Baha'i now for 55 years. I actually, like so many American Baha'is, and actually Baha'is in the Western world, generally speaking, are people from some other religious heritage who found answers in these teachings that they were looking for. In some way, not that they weren't happy with the with their religious experience up to that point necessarily, but they had questions like me that I found satisfactorily answered by these teachings when I was just 19. So now you can figure out what my age is. I've been around, to my great surprise, almost 75 years, and 55 of them as a Baha'i. I discovered this when I was a freshman in college, not high school. And I'm going to take a sip of water, which I will do periodically. Because
put it on the table here.
Yes, thank you. Because yes.
So people at home can see you.
Hi.
Taking just one step back.
Oh,
No, the other way. See, you're close to the owl is our video as
okay.
well.
This way.
Yeah, and then
Oh, thank you so much.
see, so if you turn towards the owl is the
That's
camera.
the owl.
Yeah, that's the camera. So if you take
Why is
another
that?
step back, then they can see you at home. If you're a little further away, closer to the screen, but further from the owl.
Okay, so this is good?
Well, no, a little bit.
A little bit this way.
Yeah. Now if you
Now face this way.
now if you turn
Now
towards the
turn this
owl.
There you
Okay,
go.
they don't mind seeing the back of my
There,
face.
perfect.
There you are.
You can't see yourself, but we can.
I know there's a political figure who suffered some embarrassment or, criticism because in the middle of a talk that was televised, and with an audience of millions, stopped and had to take some water. I'm afraid in my case, it's necessary because I take blood pressure medication, which has, I'm happy to say, has brought down my blood pressure wonderfully, but also dries me out. I don't have too much spittle. I think maybe would be the right word without it. So once again, so nice to be with you this morning and to be able to talk about this faith, which, I always tell people, I love poetry. I was a literature student in college and love, of course, our great American poet, Robert Frost, who I'm sure you're all familiar with this poem. It's one of his most celebrated poems, The Road Not Taken, right? And really, anytime I have the chance to talk about the Baha'i faith, that's a story of my life, that I came across this when I was 19, as I mentioned, and I heard about it from a dear friend of mine, who's still a dear friend of mine, I'm happy to say, lives right here in Chicago, as it turns out. It's interesting how that came about. But back in New York, we were having dinner together. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and she happened to bring up in the course of it enjoying some pretty bad Cantonese Chinese food. She said, and she asked me if I had ever heard of Baha'i. And I said, no, what's that? She said, it's a religion. I said, oh, that's interesting. She said, my brother recently became a Baha'i. And Tom, I think this is something you'd be interested in, because she had heard already from me many times I just couldn't stop talking about religion and how important it was, and yet how unsatisfied I was with certain things about its place in our society, in my estimation. So she said, this is something you'd be interested in. She invited me to a Baha'i gathering. She said, this is wonderful. The adults, because she was 17, I was 18. She said the adults sit around in a circle and the young people generally sit in the middle on the floor, and they ask you questions and they actually listen to your answers. At age 18, that was something that got me right there. Wow. So about 2 days later, I attended my first Baha'i gathering, and I just, I fell in love with it from the first evening. I'd never been in such a diverse company. I grew up in a suburb of New York City, about 15 miles from, just like here in Glenview, in relation to Chicago, about 15 miles from the city, and largely expatriates from the metropolitan New York area, from the boroughs of New York, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, largely Italian and Irish people. I grown up amongst, and so it was wonderfully diverse gatherings. Very few times in my life, except maybe walking around on the streets of Queens, or Manhattan, had I ever experienced such a diverse gathering. So that would impress me from the start. And of course, the teachings I love. In many respects, they coincided with conclusions that I had already come to myself in my own spiritual journey. And I hope to talk a little bit about that and being with you this morning. I'm saying all this just to because Junior asked me to mention something about how I became Baha'i, and that really was where it began. Although it took me almost a year before I was ready to formally embrace it. And there is a process, which I'll talk about a little bit too. During which time, as I say, from the first evening, I was so enraptured by everything I heard. There was an impulse to embrace it right then and there. But I said, wait a minute, there was a part of me that said, check this out. Take your time, explore this, make sure you know what you're doing. and which I did. I attended many gatherings. I went home that first evening with an armload of books, and about 9 months later, interestingly enough, I formally embraced the faith. And I'm mentioning all this because just a few days ago, on April 3rd, was the 55th anniversary of my formally embracing the faith. So it's nice that I'm here with you this morning talking about all of this, because it just such a nice coincides with that so nicely. So I'm not sure what I would have said without this, or how I would have approached speaking to you this morning without Junia's giving me an outline of things that she thought I should address in the course of this chat with you. And it's perfect, so even better than I probably would have done without the aid of her prompting. So first thing I want to talk about is the history of the Baha'i faith, because you're all somewhat familiar with it. You probably have driven past hundreds of times our house of worship on the corner of Sheridan and Linden. And I will talk about the building and its history also a little bit as part of this talk, because Junia suggested that I do that. But so that you know, the faith has a history. It's better today. 55 years ago when I first was exploring this, it was not well known. It was obscure. There probably were only about 25,000 Baha'is in the whole United States at that point. Now it's 10 times that many in that span of time. We have a community of about 200,000 in the United States, about 5 or 6 million worldwide. But certain misconceptions of the Baha'i faith persist. Those who know anything about it know it's all about unity. If you ask me in a nutshell, what is it about? The word unity would be one of the things I would first mention. And we'll get into that a little bit, I hope, and what I have to say to you. But sometimes people imagine, this is probably a group of people in California, probably, who got together and said, let's make a religion. Oh, good.
Yours can be more comfortable.
Let's come up with a religion that has something, that will be syncretic, that will take some of the good things about all religion, put them together, and just be perfect for this time, this period that we're living in. But what I have to say is no, that is not how it began, not at all. Like all the great faiths, the Baha'i faith began with one person, whose title is Baha'u'llah. He lived during the 19th century. Baha'u'llah, I wish I had a blackboard or something. I wish I brought some visuals. I just didn't have time to prepare anything. But Baha'u'llah is a compound word. It's Arabic. And the word Baha in Arabic means glory. Can be translated as glory. Allah, of course, is the name for God. So Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. That's a title in the same way that Jesus of Nazareth is known. Christ wasn't his last name. Christ is a title, which in Greek means the anointed, right? And Prince Siddhartha Gautama of India is known as the Buddha, right? The enlightened one. So, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. And a little bit about him, he was a nobleman. Again, the faith was born in 19th century Persia, as it used to be called. Today we use the word Iran because it actually became the policy of the Iranian government to use that name for the country. Iran means land of Aryans. I don't know if you knew that, but the ethnic origins of the Iranian people are European. They're considered an Indo-European people, like the people of India, as opposed to their neighbors who are mostly Arabs. So that was something that Jimmy Carter pointed out to our friend Gerald Ford, if you remember back years ago in those debates where Mr. Ford, said Iran was an Arab country, and he said, no, they're not. So Baha'u'llah, Iran was for centuries, the history of Iran or Persia goes back actually thousands of years. And through all those thousands of years was a monarchy, one of the longest lasting monarchies in the world. And that monarchy ended, of course, we don't know for how long, perhaps it will resume someday, but in 1979, with the recent Islamic Revolution, excuse me. Baha'u'llah was part of the aristocracy of the country as a young person, because his father was what's called a vizier or a courtier of the king. Two of the Ajar was the dynasty at that time in Iran, and he was a courtier or an associate of the king, an advisor to the king. That is his father, I should say, was. And so it was thought that Baha'u'llah would follow in his footsteps. But as a young person, he declined he did not want to follow any sort of political pathway in life. Instead, he was a landholder, and it was a feudal society, so he had wealth and he had landholdings, and he preferred to he was known as the father of the poor because he was a loving and compassionate person, unusually loving and compassionate, and concerned about the people who lived under his charge as a landholder. But at a certain point, and this is really abbreviating the story quite a bit, but at a certain point in his young years, when he was in his late 20s, he began an itinerant ministry, much the way Jesus did, traveling around the country and promulgating the teachings that I'm going to talk about in a little while, which put him at odds almost immediately with the ecclesiastical and political forces in his country who considered him a heretic and a stirrer up of sedition. And within short order, he was only in his late 20s, he ran afoul of the authorities, and he was imprisoned. And eventually, because of his high position in Persian society, he might have been killed. It was dangerous to be accused of sedition in his society, but instead they exiled him. And so he spent the remainder of his life, the remaining 40 years of his life plus, in various places of exile. First to the neighboring country of Iraq, later to Ottoman Turkey, Constantinople, then Adrianople, which is actually on the European continent, and finally to the prison city of Akka in Palestine, what was then Palestine, the region of Palestine, what today is Israel. So people always wonder, those who know anything about the Baha'i faith maybe have been to the Holy Land, know that our world headquarters is there in Israel, in Haifa, Israel, which is across the bay from this other place, Akka. And it's there, a faith that was born in Iran and Persia has its world headquarters in Israel because that's where Baha'u'llah passed from this life in 1892. And his shrine is there, and that's a place of pilgrimage for Baha'is from all over the world. It's also the world headquarters of our administrative structure, which I'll talk about a little bit too hereafter. But anyway, it all revolves around, to make a long story short, and I really am abbreviating it quite a bit, it all revolves around this person, Baha'u'llah, his teachings, and his example. And just as all the other great faiths, obviously Christianity revolves around the person and life of Jesus Christ. And Judaism is rooted in the revelation of Moses, right? The one who held converse with God on Mount Sinai and delivered the Ten Commandments, right? Or Buddhism revolves around the person of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, the enlightened. Hinduism, there is this figure, Krishna, is the one who is considered the revelator, the original, the Hindu, the ancient, because it really goes back thousands of years, 3,000 or 4,000 years, one of the oldest religions in the world. But Hinduism originated in, when you read the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of their holy books, it's a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, who's a warrior. And much of the spiritual principles, I guess one could say, of Hinduism are rooted in this text. Hello, welcome. Please make yourself comfortable. That's good. Yeah. Okay. So that's the one thing that I wanted to convey about history is that, like all the great religions, this wouldn't have existed were it not for this person who appeared during the 19th century and eventually attracted followers, a lot of them, and many who suffered persecution and still do to this day in that part of the world because it was heresy to say that a revelation from God could come after Muhammad. Muslims believe, again, after, excuse myself.
The last prophet.
Exactly, Muslims believe part of the mission of Muhammad, the apostle of God, as they think of him, was to correct certain misunderstandings that all the religions, including Christianity, had. They, in the Quran, it refers to Christians as those who have joined partners with God. So part of, not all Westerners know this, I dare say too few know it, but an article of faith in Islam is belief in Jesus, and
One of the prophets.
that's right, as one of the prophets of God. And in fact, they refer to him as Ruhullah, the spirit of God. So that's the kind of reverence that Muslims have for Jesus, or supposed to have. And excuse me, every Muslim that's an article of faith must believe not only in Muhammad as the apostle of God, but those who preceded him, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and the whole line of lesser prophets of Israel. So it's really too bad in the 21st century that we still really, both of these huge religious followings here in the West, Christians, and in the East, there are almost 2 billion Muslims, a wide swath of the world, all the way from Northern Africa to the Philippines, adheres to this faith, and yet we still know so little about it, and it seems have so many misunderstandings. A lot of them propagated by the followers of these faiths themselves, unfortunately. That's part of the sad saga of religion in the world, that, we have made it something that had put walls and barriers between us as a human family, instead of understanding that they're all one. And that's one of if I leave you with nothing else this morning, and what are the teachings of Baha'u'llah? I want to get to that, and it's kind of important. Three things are, one could say, if I had to sum it up in a nutshell, what are the teachings of this person, and why did he attract a following, and why are there 5 or 6 million Baha'is worldwide today? He teaches 3 onenesses. Those are like the core teachings of the Baha'i faith. One, that God is one. Doesn't matter what name we call God by. If in one part of the world God is Allah, in another part of the world God is Brahma. Among Zoroastrians, God is Ahura Mazda. To the Jews, he was Yahweh or Jehovah God. I always was amused by, in the television series, which I didn't like all that much, but I like this particular episode, All in the Family, where Meathead, the son-in-law, is trying to enlighten his father-in-law, and, he's saying, Arch, Allah is just the Arabic word for God. So when Muslims say Allah, they're talking about God. Say that, I don't want to hear that. His name is God, just look in the Bible. So one of the first teachings of Baha'u'llah is that God is one, and all of these faiths, the terminology might be different, the doctrine, the dogma that we have developed, we humans have taken these simple and pure teachings of all these great, we call them manifestations of God. And, that was the impetus of Islam. I kind of made a brief reference to that before, that Christians have joined partners with God, meaning that by putting Jesus on the same level as God, with the idea of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, in their mind, as Muhammad observed, they were putting Jesus, they had such reverence for Jesus, they put him on the same level as God. And rightly or wrongly, but in the Baha'i faith, God is unknowable. This is what Baha'u'llah says, that any conception of God that we might cook up as humans is doomed to be wrong, because he is the creator. We are we use that pronoun, he, God is a being that is beyond gender. It's just a tradition that leads us to, at least in this part of the world, to make that distinction. But this God is unknowable in his essence. How we know him, how we know that God exists, is through his manifestations. Like the romantic poets in English literature, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, were all, that was one of the characteristics that united them. Their work is that they all were just utterly enamored of nature, particularly Wordsworth. And they found God in nature. That was the whole, like the central theme of that kind of, that development in English poetry, that simply by going out and being in contact with nature, one could understand the greatness and majesty of this universe that we find ourselves in, that it's perfectly beautiful and ordered, makes sense. So, it suggests that there was a mind, some sort of intelligence behind how all this good stuff got here. So Baha'u'llah says, in sum, God is one. Doesn't matter what name we call him by, that's immaterial. Just interesting. It makes the world an interesting place. One of the principles of the Baha'i faith is unity in diversity. We're not trying to homogenize the world. We're saying we're beautiful just the way we are. We don't need any improvement. Who we are is a product of millions of years of evolution. Well, in the case of humans, maybe less than millions. I'm not sure. But let's understand, this is another of the central Baha'i teachings, and I better watch my time. Let's understand that beneath the skin, we are one human family. That is probably the hallmark of the Baha'i teachings. One God, one religion, and all religion really, when you drill deeply enough down through the dogma, through the doctrine, through the outward differences of ceremony and form, there is a commonality that is astonishing. The simple idea of the golden rule exists, do unto others as one would have done to oneself, exists in all of the great faiths of the world. expressed maybe a little differently. They all talk about the same thing. In this respect, they all talk about how our essence is spiritual, you know. As you know, as explorers of spiritual enrichment, that is what distinguishes humans from every other form of life, at least on this planet. And that is that, you know, as these individuals have been telling us for thousands of years, we are in essence spiritual beings. There is a part of us that survives our physical death, that this life is transient, temporary. We're here for a reason, but the day will come when we have to move on, and we move on to, as Jesus said, you know, in my Father's house there are many mansions, right? We move on to a new home in one of the other worlds of God, and you know there are as many as there are numbers of us, and we move on to the one that we have earned through the life that we led in this plane of existence. So there's nothing different about the Baha'i teachings in this respect. And you know, we like to think that or maybe say it this way, that the spiritual verities that are at the heart of all these great world faiths are remarkably alike. And that's not an accident. It's because there really is only one religion, the religion of God and man. And it's we who have, because there's something about human beings, a foible, I guess you could say a human foible is that we love to erect barriers. You know, we have something that's good. We say, uh-oh, you know, if we don't put walls around it and preserve it, like certain things that are going on in the world right now, you know, let's build a wall. Keep those bloody foreigners out of here, you know. Only we'll let you in if we think you deserve it, all right? But you have to be worthy. That was not in the plan of God. The plan of God is that each age was given one of these great individuals who was a vehicle of his revelation, his teaching for that time. So the Baha'i faith talks about a concept that we could call progressive revelation. In other words, that each one of these individuals, be it Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Krishna, Buddha, and Zoroaster, and many others that beyond those, but those are some of the key ones. And each one of them has brought his share of light and goodness to the world. It's something that was important for his time and for the audience to whom he addressed. So why not recognize that and embrace all of them? So when you visit that Baha'i house of worship that's down the road there a few miles, you see that the architect was, and this was deliberate, wove the symbols of all those great world faiths into the pillars that flank their entrances. There are 9 entrances. It's circular. One can enter from any one of 9 sides because it was meant to show that all of these great faiths that we're talking about are pathways to one and the same God. You know, it all, if you look up, they all fan out from one common point. All are ways to understand that we have a creator and to develop a relationship with our creator. That's our job in this world, as it were. So this is kind of a rambling progression. Because I'm just talking, I should have said this at the beginning, you know, I had the intention of presenting a few caveats at the beginning of this. First of all, in the Baha'i faith, I think this is important to know, and something Junior wanted me to talk about. We don't have a clergy in the Baha'i faith. I'm not a minister. I'm not a cleric of any sort. I'm just your brother Thomas, who, you know, happens to be a person who, you know, I've had 55 years of experience with this faith tradition, studying it, learning about it to this day, having certain notions that I had corrected by my further understandings of it and of religion in general. You know, it's been an impetus to me to know more about religion in general. That's, you know, something that Baha'u'llah wants all Baha'is to do, is to recognize the light and good that each one of the great faiths of the world, each one of these manifestations of God has brought to the world. And so we believe in all of them. You know, to be a Baha'i is to be a Jew, to be a Christian, to be a Muslim, to be a Hindu, to be a Buddhist, because we believe all of them not only had value in the time in which they were brought to humanity, but still do. You know, the spiritual verities that they brought to the world will never perish. So you know, the Ten Commandments, just because I'm talking about Baha'u'llah this morning and his teachings, doesn't mean that, let's say, the Ten Commandments have been revoked. Those will be good for all time. So there, you know, there's much that we can learn from the teachings of all of these and, you know, worship at the Baha'i temple, kind of, again, getting a little out of sequence in this presentation, but worship is very simple. We read from the sacred texts of all the world's great faiths, principally our own, of course, but, you know, on any date, you might hear something from the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads of Hinduism, the Dhammapada of the Buddhists, the Zendavesta of the Zoroastrians, the Torah, the Gospel, the Quran, and others, because they are meaningful and will always be meaningful to us. So, you know, it's important for us to be basically knowledgeable about all of them and to derive all the good that is in them. So that's a mission of every Baha'i. I think that's a good way of putting it. One God, one religion, the religion of God and man, that has had many manifestations. And well, we don't claim finality for this revelation of Baha'u'llah. We are told, he tells us that in due course there will be others that will continue this progressive revelation of God to man. So why do we have this? Why isn't, you know, obvious question would be, like I myself posed at the beginning when I was first learning about this. Well, you know, what's wrong with just being a Christian and being as good a Christian as you can? Nothing. But the idea is that each one of these has brought something new. And the new part of what they brought, they reaffirmed the same spiritual verities we already talked about, you know, that we are spiritual beings, that we have a brief time in this plane of existence, and that we will move on, and our destiny is in these spiritual worlds, and our destiny depends on our conduct in this world, right? And developing this spiritual part of us as much as we can. Earthly things, earthly vanities, you know, beauty, money, power, you know, they might entertain us for a brief while, but then, you know, if we think that, like the pharaohs of Egypt, that we might carry those to other worlds, we're going to be sadly disappointed. They don't survive our physical death. The only thing that does is what's in here. That's the thing that remains. One God, one religion, one humanity. These are the essential Baha'i teachings, that we are one human family, that this isn't just a noble idea. Isn't that nice? We're all part of one human family. We are, in fact, one human family, as science increasingly has shown, you know, that the human family probably had its origins in Africa. Millennia ago, and when we came down from the trees and we discovered fire and, you know, became hunters instead of gatherers for our sustenance, then developed domesticated animals and developed agriculture. We could actually raise certain crops for our food. a constant supply of water was needed. And so the growing human family followed the river systems out of Africa, fanned out across the world through the forces of evolution, natural selection, developed different racial characteristics. You know, it was more advantageous to have light skin if you lived in Northern Europe, because you could absorb more sunlight that way. Vitamin D and sunlight. Was useful to have dark skin if you lived in sub-Saharan Africa and hair that stayed closer to your head so you didn't get caught in the trees when you were running through the jungle. You know, so all these things, they all are the result of, you know, thousands upon thousands of years of evolutionary change. But underneath the skin, when we look at the DNA of human beings, we find, if we just look at its composition, people from northernmost Scandinavia and sub-Saharan Africa could be from the same family. You know, just looking at it at that level, there's really no difference. We're all part of one human family. In a sense, the Genesis story of Adam and Eve is true. We began as one human family. We became a large and diverse human family and, you know, developed different languages, different cultures, different religions. But the process is now, and this is really what the Baha'i faith is about, is those three onennesses that I talked about, and another thing, I said unity, and the human family is coming together. And this is something I'm going to say in this gathering, and I will keep saying it until they lay my bones down. Nothing is going to prevent the world from becoming one. That process is underway, and the efforts of recalcitrant and stubborn people who want to, you know, return to some former, in their mind, great existence the way that it's not going to be, you know. We live on a diverse planet, and diverse peoples of the world are coming together because of the advancements in communications technology, transportation. It's made the world, I don't have to tell you this, it's a global village. And so it's no longer possible for us to have that sort of world where, you know, we live in these isolated spheres of existence. The world is becoming one. And whether we like it or not, whether we embrace it or whether we go to it kicking and screaming, it is going to be that way.
Thomas, could you talk about the fact that you have many different temples
Yes,
in different parts of the world?
true. Yes.
I don't know what the timing is.
Yes, I don't know what the timing is either. I gotta pay attention to that. Whoops.
Well, till 9:45, 9:50, as long as we get to church by 10, let's talk.
Okay.
And also, can you talk about the evening,
Well, not
I
bad.
think you have afternoon services, you don't meet on Sunday morning.
No,
Example,
no, correct.
I think.
Good observations. Yes,
I'd be interested in.
sure. Some of those more, yes. Okay, so I spoke of the generalities. Maybe a lot of you know those things already, living in such close proximity to the temple. Maybe you visited there.
Thomas, you have to step back a little bit because of the owl.
Oh, the owl. Now I got it.
So we can see you at home.
I paid a little more attention, I would have understood. Yes, what you say is absolutely true. The Baha'i House of Worship, I talked a little bit about the architecture, and it was deliberately conceived that way by the architect, who was a man by the name of Louis Bourgeois, who was a French-Canadian architect and a Baha'i, and he wanted the temple to bespeak the faith. So hence the symbols, the Star of David, the cross of Christianity, the crescent moon and star of Islam, the wheel of Buddhism, they're all woven into the tracery in the exterior of the building. Inside the temple, in the sanctuary, we don't really usually call it that, but it's an auditorium. That's where worship takes place. We don't have a Sabbath in the Baha'i faith. I'll explain about that a little bit in a moment, but unlike Judaism and the other Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all have a specific day of the week. We don't have that in the Baha'i faith, but there are devotional services that take place there daily. And as I said, we read. The only thing that is heard inside the auditorium of the Baha'i House of Worship is the Word of God. There are no sermons. There's no delivery of doctrine or anybody's interpretation. It's strictly the Word of God, which we consider the writings of Baha'u'llah to be, but also the holy books that I made passing reference to. So on any given day, you'll hear something from some or all of them. Yes, we don't have weddings there. Usually it's considered too sacred for that to take place there. But there are weddings at the temple all the time. Usually people have them either outside in the gardens during the nice weather. It's a lovely setting. And we actually have thousands of people over the years who have come to the temple to be married there who are not Baha'is. In fact, the temple gets about 250,000 visitors every year, and I would say 99% of them are not Baha'is. One normally thinks of a house of worship and they think, oh, well, that's where the Baha'is congregate. In truth, that's not so, and at least now in this faith community, because we're too young. It's only 180 some years old. So there are Baha'i communities, by the way, here on the North Shore in almost every municipality, or the major ones. There's a Baha'i community here in Winnetka. I'm from Glenview. We have a Baha'i community there. We have one in Evanston, a large one. Obviously, Chicago is a large Baha'i community, Highland Park, Northbrook, and so on. And in each of our individual communities, we meet in each other's homes, usually, because we're not large enough to have any, except in Chicago, excuse me, any sort of gathering place yet. Although Baha'is throughout the country are working on that. If you went to California, you'd probably find a lot of individual Baha'i communities have some sort of structure that they bought or made as a gathering place. But generally speaking, we are too far away from that still. That day will come. And the number of, in the time that I have been in Baha'i, these 55 years, I've seen our houses of worship multiply in the world. One's like the one here in Wilmette, which was the first one in the Western world. And, not enough people know, even Baha'is, not enough to know about the history of that building. It's fascinating. And it's so, the Baha'is of the Chicago area purchased that land in 1909. The design for the building was, different architects came up with different schemes for it, and one that was offered by Mr. Bourgeois, who I mentioned before, was accepted in 1919. So that became the one that would be built. The cornerstone for the building was laid by the son of the founder who came to this country. He's known as Abdul Baha. And he was, like his father, a prisoner of the combined forces of the Persian and Turkish empires. But he was released in the early 20th century by the so-called Young Turks revolution that took place in Ottoman Turkey and overthrew the Sultan, and all of the political and religious prisoners like him were released. So he was able to travel eventually to Europe and also to the United States. He was here in 1912 and spoke at gatherings in diverse houses of worship, synagogues. Here in Chicago, he spoke at Hull House, associated with the work of Jane Addams, and the fourth annual convention of the NAACP, which was held in the Masonic Temple downtown. But he also came here to Wilmette, to the property that had been purchased by that time. to lay the cornerstone for the building, which is still there. You can see it. It's in the lower level of the temple. It's been preserved just, exactly where it was placed that day. The temple itself the exterior of the temple wasn't complete until 1944, 100th anniversary of the faith's founding. 1844 is usually given as the date of the origin of the Baha'i faith. So in 1944, the exterior was finally finished. It took a long time because it was all done through the voluntary contributions of Baha'is all over the world. We didn't solicit money from anyone, although there were some people, even Andrew Carnegie was interested in making a contribution to it, but we don't solicit or accept donations from people who are not members of our community. We're not allowed to do that. It wasn't done on credit. It was done just through the voluntary contributions of Baha'is all over the world. It took until 1944 to complete the exterior, and the interior in 1953. So the whole thing was done, exterior, interior, the gardens, and so on. 1953 is when the temple was dedicated. A long process from 1912, when the cornerstone was laid, to 1953. There's nothing but the word of God heard in the temple auditorium. But however, downstairs we have something else, which we refer to as Foundation Hall, which is a large auditorium also where other sorts of meetings are held, where we have presentations of all kinds. Recently, for example, we had a number of presentations related to Black History Month downstairs. At the temple, we've had, many, countless other gatherings. We like to think that it is available. We've had some of the gatherings of our Trier Multi-Faith Alliance there, including a gathering last September, which spoke to the advancement of women's rights around the world and was addressed by representatives of all of the different faith traditions that are part of our alliance. Such gatherings are an outgrowth of our wish to advance these teachings in the world. There's no proselytizing in the Baha'i faith. I should mention that. We don't knock on people's doors. We don't assault people on the street or, at the airport. That's not our way. So one of the ways that we do bring the public's attention to this faith and these teachings, which we think have relevance to the world that we're living in, of course, is through these temples. So I'm finally getting to what Junia asked me. Yes, besides this one here in Wilmette, there's one, nearest one is in Panama City in Central America, and in Santiago, Chile. It's one of the most recent ones that was erected. Moving over to Europe, Frankfurt, Germany. Moving down to Africa, Kampala, Uganda. Moving east, New Delhi, India. There's a magnificent one that they refer to as the Lotus Temple because it looks just like a lotus flower, a massive lotus flower. But it still has all of the features that Baha'i houses of worship must have. This comes from the teachings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Wahab. It should be circular in design, should have 9 sides and 9 entrances, symbolizing again the idea that it can be approached from any pathway, but they all meet in one place. So New Delhi, India, Sydney, Australia, Apia, Samoa, because there actually is a large community of Baha'is in this Pacific Islands, South Pacific Islands. It's interesting that, we always refer to it as a world faith, and people wonder, well, why do you say that? Because although it originated in the Middle East, people naturally think, well, this is a Middle Eastern faith. It's not, certainly not designed to be that. it's designed to be like all of them were, a world faith, and all are welcome. Yes,
I'm curious, I didn't mean to cut you off, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
So I have a number of friends who are Baha'i, and my understanding is that, I mean, they take incredible, care to be part of social justice movements, that they're always very progressive and moving forward, but apolitical, is that correct?
True, yes.
Okay, can you talk just a little bit
Of
about
course, yes.
the why of that?
Thank you for your question. I'm sorry to go
And
on.
then we need to, then we'll need to stop because
We're getting
it's
close to
almost.
almost 8:45. Oh, okay.
Chris, could you include it?
Obviously, I could talk about this all day. I'm sorry.
That took place across the United States?
Yes, I watched some of that yesterday. That was wonderful, in my opinion, my humble opinion.
But how does that relate to the Baha'i religion?
Well, we, just as the lady said, we are apolitical. That is, we Baha'is don't subscribe to any political party. So, but we do take an interest in the world we're living in. Baha'u'llah says, be anxiously concerned about the world that you live in. So, and he also predicted that we would. So, we're not people who put our heads in the sand and say, everything's beautiful. No. We are bound to, the guardian of this faith. I just could talk about it for hours, obviously, but warned us that, he said the ultimate destiny of humanity is great, unimaginably great. Great. The destiny of humanity, great. But the immediate destiny of humanity is dark, distressingly dark. And I think we are, he was asked about the World War II because he was alive at that time, the guardian of this faith, who was third in line and among the central figures of this faith, lived from late 19th century to 1957, and he was in charge of the administration of the Baha'i faith throughout the world at that time. He said, we shouldn't think that just because of course, obviously, that time, World War II, everyone was still recuperating from what had been probably the most disastrous, probably is not good enough a word, undoubtedly the most destructive, costly in human lives and in decimating Europe, right? And Japan, of course, cost millions upon millions of lives. Probably the darkest chapter in human history to that point. But he said we shouldn't think that, because there was a time when there was also great hope that, the emergence of the United Nations following World War II, which is something Baha'is were very excited about, because in our teachings advocate world government. It's one of the reasons that we are apolitical, because we think the future of the world, obviously we believe the world is going to become one. Doesn't mean that the world will, that nations will give up their sovereignty. Some of it, The problem with the United Nations is a wonderful concept. Unfortunately, the reason that it's failing largely in its peacekeeping aspect is because the nations of the world have, give it lip service, but they don't abide by its adjudications, right? When it's in their national interest, they do, but when it isn't, they ignore it. So that's never going to work. It's working in many other respects, in terms of the work that it's done to advance health and education throughout the world. These are all things that we believe in deeply as Baha'is. But we don't believe in subscribing to any political party. We think there's something, there's a grain of truth in.
Can you vote?
Can we vote? Of course, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So of course we vote for the person that we think is best, that we individually in our own mind think is best qualified for the job. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think, because I've been to the Sunday services, and
Mhm.
they're usually 6 o'clock in the afternoon, or they used to be, I haven't been for a while.
Yeah.
And I know you also involve music in your services
Yes.
too.
Yes,
They, of course, I would imagine all from the different religions and have different.
can be, yeah. Music is evolving, I would say, at the Baha'i House of Worship, because we're still too young to really have music that could be called Baha'i. So, well, we have had some great musicians, Dizzy Gillespie, with Seals and Cross, you might remember from the 70s. There are others today.
When are your worship services? If you have a worship gathering, when are they?
Well, a good question. It's a little complicated. As I said, we
This
don't
is
have
gonna
a
have to be the
statute.
last question. I
Okay,
think.
this will be the last question. I'm skipping around a lot, and forgive me. We meet every 19 days for what's called a feast. That's the closest thing to the Sabbath that we have in the Baha'i faith.
Then it can be of any day of the week.
Can be any day of the week, yes, because whenever it happens to fall, we have a calendar that we follow that was initiated by actually by the forerunner of our faith. There was another individual besides Baha'u'llah, I didn't even mention, but in our faith, he was like John the Baptist is in Christian history. He was the one who prepared the way for Baha'u'llah. And he conceived of a calendar that we still follow. It's 19 months of 19 days each. So on the first day of each Baha'i month, we meet for what's called a 19-day feast. And that has a spirit, has a devotional element. We pray, we read from writings. We also discuss the business of the community. And we socialize. So much like what happens in the church, pretty much, certainly a Protestant church, on Sundays. But it's just not in these 7-day-a-week calendar.
Thomas,
I know I must hurry, so thanks so much for this opportunity. Pardon the,
I suspect there'll be many more questions, except that we all need to get.
of course.
Wonderful way to get a lot of us beginning to think more about
Please,
our neighbors.
Yes, please. I should have said that right from the start, that, I said that it's really not a place where Baha'is congregate. We do have, daily devotions there. Some Baha'is go there, most don't for that purpose. However, we do have on our 9 holy days, we do have formal gatherings there, but it's mostly there for the community. And that's what we want to say above all else, that everyone is welcome there to enjoy the beauty of that place, to pray and meditate in your own way there, whatever is meaningful to you. It belongs to the people of this area. So please, and even as I mentioned downstairs in Foundation Hall, we have gatherings of all sorts, things that are in the community interest, and you also are welcome to plan something for there, and just talk to the people who manage the temple, and they will help you organize something like that.
We held a living several months ago. We
Mhm.
took a complete tour. and it was
Great.
wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity.